You cannot move. You are lying on the floor of a cave, and your legs will not answer you. Your right arm ends above the wrist. One of your eyes sees only blur, and the world has gone quiet in a way that means you can no longer hear the people moving around you. By every rule we imagine governed the ancient world, you should already be dead, and yet someone is kneeling beside you, lifting water to your mouth. We tell ourselves a story about the deep past, and it is a brutal one. Survival of the fittest. A world with no mercy, where the weak were left behind because the group could not afford them. We picture our ancestors as hard, desperate people who abandoned anyone who could not keep up, because keeping up was the only way to live. The bones tell a different story. They tell a story that is almost impossible to believe until you see how often it repeats, across continents, across hundreds of thousands of years, across species of human that are not even our own. Again and again, the archaeological record shows the same astonishing thing. Ancient humans did not abandon the helpless. They carried them. Begin in a cave in the mountains of northern Iraq, a place called Shanidar. In the 1950s, the archaeologist Ralph Solecki uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal man, a man who lived around 45,000 years ago. We call him Shanidar 1. And when researchers studied his skeleton, they realized they were looking at a body that should not have survived. His right arm was withered and ended above the wrist, possibly amputated. The bones of his face showed a crushing injury to the left side, which likely left him blind in one eye. Bony growths in his ear canal suggest he was probably deaf. His legs carried the marks of old, badly healed injuries that would have left him limping in constant pain. This was a man who could not hunt, could not gather, could not hear danger coming or see it approach from one side. In a world we imagine as merciless, he was the definition of a burden. And he lived into his 40s. He lived for years, possibly decades, with injuries that made it impossible to feed or defend himself, which means something simple and overwhelming. For all those years, other people fed him, protected him, made room for him, decided over and over every single day that he was worth keeping alive. How do we know it counts as care and not just luck? This is the work of an archaeologist named Lorna Tilley, who built an entire method around that question. She called it the bioarchaeology of care. Before archaeology, Tilley had been a nurse, and she understood something most people miss. She knew exactly what it takes to keep a helpless person alive. Someone has to bring them food and water. Someone has to clean them. Someone has to turn their bodies so they do not develop deadly pressure sores. None of that happens by accident. If a skeleton shows a person survived years with an injury that made them dependent, then hidden inside those bones is the proof of another person's labor. And once you know how to read for it, you find it everywhere. Travel to Vietnam, to a Neolithic burial site called Man Bac, where Tilley and the archaeologist Mark Oxenham studied a young man known as Burial 9. He had been paralyzed from the waist down, with almost no use of his arms, likely from a condition that fused his spine in adolescence. He was, in the language of medicine, a quadriplegic in a small farming community around 4,000 years ago, in a place where signs of famine marked the bones of his neighbors. He lived like that for around 10 years. Think about what that decade required. In a community that was itself starving at times, people chose to spend their scarce food, their scarce time, their scarce energy, keeping alive a young man who could not stand, could not work, could not feed himself. They lifted him. They cleaned him. They fed him by hand, every day, for 10 years. They did this while hungry. And they did it anyway. It goes back further than farming, further than our species. At Atapuerca in Spain, in a chamber so rich with fossils it is called the Pit of Bones, researchers including Ana Gracia found the skull of a child who lived around 500,000 years ago. The child, sometimes called Benjamina, had a condition called craniosynostosis, where the plates of the skull fused too early, twisting the head and very likely causing serious disability. This child lived to around 5 or 8 years old. In a world 500,000 years before the first city, a child who needed constant care was given it, for years, until the day they died. And then there is the discovery that may be the most moving of all. At a Spanish site called Cova Negra, the researcher Mercedes Conde Valverde studied the tiny inner ear bone of a Neanderthal child. The anatomy pointed to a condition we would recognize today as Down syndrome. This child, nicknamed Tina, would have struggled to hear, to keep balance, perhaps to feed easily. A Neanderthal mother could not have carried such a child alone through a hard, mobile, dangerous life. Which means the rest of the group must have helped. They shared the work of raising a child who would never be able to repay them. That last detail matters more than it seems, because for years, people argued that ancient care might have been selfish. You help the injured hunter because one day he might recover and hunt again. It is an investment. But a child born, unable to contribute, breaks that logic completely. There is no return on that investment. There is only one explanation left. They cared for the child because they loved the child. So let's reconstruct what that care actually looked like. Not the heroic version, the real one. It is the unglamorous, exhausting, daily work of keeping a body alive that cannot keep itself alive. It is carrying someone to a warmer spot near the fire. It is chewing food soft enough for someone who cannot chew it themselves. It is the long, patient labor of cleaning, lifting, turning day after day, with no applause and no guarantee of thanks. It is a whole community quietly agreeing, without ever saying it aloud, that a human life does not have to be useful to be worth saving. Here is the twist that changes everything. We tend to assume compassion was a luxury, something humans could only afford once survival was handled, a soft addition that came late, after the hard work of staying alive was done. The archaeologist Penny Spikins argues the exact opposite. She believes that caring for one another was not a side effect of becoming human. It was one of the engines of it. Think about what a caring group can do that a selfish one cannot. If you know the group will not abandon you the moment you are hurt, you can take risks. You can hunt dangerous animals, explore new lands, push into harsh winters, knowing that an injury is not automatically a death sentence. Trust like that lets a group attempt things no lone, fearful animal ever could. The willingness to carry each other was not weakness. It was a strategy. The groups that cared were the groups that survived. Compassion, it turns out, may be one of the most successful survival tools our ancestors ever developed. The kindness was not the thing humans built after they got strong. The kindness was part of how they got strong, and you still carry it. Right now, why do you feel a pull, deep and immediate, when you see someone hurt? Why does leaving a sick friend alone feel wrong in a way you cannot quite argue yourself out of? Why have humans, in every culture on Earth, built places whose entire purpose is to care for people who cannot care for themselves? Hospitals, hospices, the simple act of bringing soup to someone who is ill. That instinct is not modern. It is not soft. It is the oldest human technology there is, older than the wheel, older than farming, older even than our own species. When you sit beside someone who is suffering and you do not leave, you are doing the exact thing a Neanderthal did beside Shanidar 145,000 years ago. You are answering a call that has been ringing in human beings for 500,000 years. You were taught that the ancient world was merciless, that the weak were left to die. But every time the ground gives up another skeleton, it says the same impossible thing. We stayed. We carried each other. We decided, again and again, that no one was disposable. You cannot move. You are lying on the floor of a cave, and your body has failed you completely. And someone is kneeling beside you, lifting water to your mouth. They have done it every day. They will do it tomorrow. Not because you are useful, because you are theirs. That is not a story about how weak our ancestors were. It is the truest story we have about how human they already were.